Today we're very pleased to welcome back to the Berkeley English Department Jeffrey Berg. Mr. Berg received his BA from Berkeley in 1969 with, of course, a major in English, which we'll hear about shortly. While an undergraduate, he began working as a script reader for the Ashley famous talent agency. I look forward to asking him how, as an undergraduate, one can become a script reader. After graduation, he received a master's degree from USC and worked as an agent for Ashley Famous. He became an assistant to the chairman of Creative Management Associates, a forerunner of International Creative Management, ICM. He was named president of ICM in 1980 and currently is the chairman of the board and CEO. In his many years with the company, he has built it into one of the nation's and the world's leading talent agencies, representing artists in a variety of fields, including motion pictures, television, music, publishing, live performance, new media, and other entertainment. He's recognized as a leader in the information age who's established links between his agency and Silicon Valley. And I'm delighted to say that Mr. Berg has continued to be involved in Berkeley, serving as the chair of the executive board of the College of Letters and Sciences and as a trustee of the UC Berkeley Foundation. And particularly important to us, he's been a generous donor to the Townsend Center for the Humanities, supporting its graduate student fellowship program. So today, in this event, one in our series of conversations with distinguished alumni, we'll talk with Jeff about his trajectory from Berkeley to ICM, the value of his literary studies, why he decided to become an English major, what talent agencies do, the impact of emerging technologies in his field, and his experience as a student on campus in the English department and at Berkeley in the 1960s. In a conversation with Jeff and Kevis and myself before this event, he mentioned that he was involved in the production of the documentary Berkeley in the 60s. So he not only lived Berkeley in the 60s, but has helped to produce, I'm sure many of you have seen it, one of the main narrative and visual documentaries of the period. Well, how this will work is we'll talk for 40 minutes or so and then take questions from you all. Cards have been passed out. Please write whatever questions you may have on them. Toward the end of the conversation, I'll ask you to pass them to either side of the room. They'll be collected, and we'll ask some of them in the Q&A period. And after the conversation and questions and answers, you're all invited to a reception down the hall in Wheeler 315, where there's a large amount of delicious 330. We're in 315. Don't eat here. There's no large eat here. And 330, there's a large amount of delicious food. You are all welcome. And I'm particularly happy to see here today. We're always happy to welcome so many of our undergraduate majors and alumni. So welcome to you all, and thank you to Jeffrey Berg for coming north to see us. And I'd like to begin with a question and ask Jeff how you got from here to there, from Berkeley to Los Angeles.
By plane.
I set you up?
Yeah. As most things in life, a little serendipity, a little strategic planning, a little accident. During my summer vacations at Berkeley, I had been working, as was just mentioned, as a reader. And what that did is it gave me a very broad sense of the kinds of materials I could be working in the film industry, which is something I wanted to do, but didn't know whether I wanted to pursue it as a full-time career. But I figured if I could get access to the kinds of novels and screenplays and plays themselves that might be adapted into movies, that would be a great way, a kind of postgraduate education to my undergraduate degree here. And I was lucky because at the time I was working with novelists like James Leo Hurley, who wrote Midnight Cowboy, Anthony Burgess, who wrote Clockwork Orange, and several other novelists of that period who went on to have really great careers, not just as published writers, but their books also were made into very successful films. And I seemed to like it and stayed with it.
And in terms of trajectory, from here to there, I also wanted to ask you from being an English major to the head of ICN. That is it something you always knew you wanted to do?
I had no defined interest in business when I was an undergraduate at Berkeley. What I was interested in was reading. I was interested in history, design, art. I was also on campus at a very volatile time in the society. 65 and 69, each year there was some significant social movement going on, which you're living today with Occupy Berkeley, Occupy Oakland. It started with the free speech movement, then moved into spring mobilization and stopped the draft. And then my final year here, Berkeley was basically occupied for 3 or 4 months by the National Guard or the Alameda County Sheriffs, the Berkeley Police, the campus police. The campus actually was gassed by a helicopter. Ronald Reagan was the governor. Ed Meese, who was Reagan's attorney general, was the district attorney of Alameda. And it was a very difficult time. It was a real law and order moment. So my interest in wanting to be on campus also kind of spurred me to get interested in other things outside of campus. It was hard to be non-politically engaged here during that period of time.
And do you have a sense of how being here during that period of time affected your sense of your career or your sense of American culture? Or
it created a sense of engagement where if you were studying literature, you were actually able to apply those values to the society itself, because there was tremendous civil unrest and social inequity going on. And if you are a close reader, English or American literature, irrespective of whatever your interpretive base may be, there was enough going on here that you were able to apply it to the texts that you were reading. And it gave you a lot of insights into what was likely to occur over the next 10 years. And little did I know, 10 years afterwards, Ronald Reagan went from governor to president. So we got a second wave.
Are there other ways in which your what you experienced as an English major you brought to your career, that is, the value?
Yeah, I think so. And I remarked earlier, I thought the advantage of studying English at Berkeley in particular was it overlapped into other disciplines that were of real interest to me. So you could look at historical texts, you could look at art history, you could look at political science, you could look at dramatic arts, and then of course the vast offerings that are available to an undergraduate here. It really got down to how do you edit your way through the curriculum where you could actually get the benefit of those classes that were of great interest to me. And I was really lucky because I was working with very serious senior faculty who had a strong interest in teaching, but beyond that would also engage on a supervisory basis, either at office hours or undergraduate thesis programs that you could develop. And I got very lucky. And afterwards I was able to take that into a graduate program I did years later. But it seemed to me that the English department was the stepping stone that could lead to many other aspects of the university.
I guess that produces two questions that I have. But one is, when you were a script reader in the summers, were you reading the scripts and looking for the same sort of things that you looked for when you were writing your papers, or did you read them in a different way? What sort of things did you look for?
Okay, I mean, you're always informed by literary value, but at the same time, I was working in a very commercial context. but you could apply the same critical skills. And I think the other thing that is great about the English department is the more you read, the more attuned you become to language and structure and good writing. And great writers are great readers.
I read somewhere that you considered an academic career, though that may have been a false report.
No, that's true. I did consider it and rejected it. But,
How long before you rejected it?
a couple of months. In my senior year, I actually went around the country and looked at other campuses for the idea of possible graduate study. In fact, I visited Yale and Chapel Hill and Columbia and NYU, and I wanted to go east. But again, luckily or fortuitously, I got a job offer a month or so after I got out of school and accepted. And sometimes in life, you have to just say yes. And if my thinking was, if it didn't work out, I could always go back and pursue those graduate studies that I wanted to. And in fact, I wound up doing that later. But I thought it was a good idea in 1969 to get a job.
I guess a lot of the stuff I've read about you talk about the way in which you're an intellectual, the way that your colleagues in Hollywood are not. That at least is what they said, not my words.
Well, I read those things too.
And I was wondering if you do feel at any point a tension between Jeff Berg, the intellectual, and Jeff Berg, the pragmatic business.
Well, okay, so an intellectual should suggest that you can actually traffic in the world of ideas and be able to express those ideas, contextualize them, have some broader frame of reference, and also have a job and be successful in a business and try to raise the bar in terms of the kinds of movies or popular entertainment or theater that you're involved with. And that to me was always the trick. But it's not as though I've ever been embarrassed at being a part of commercial exercises.
When you talk about raising the bar, what kinds of things do you have in mind?
I think what I have in mind are those movies that traditionally studios don't say yes to. Those films that might require a further push because they're not going to get picked up easily because they don't conform to a ready-made formula of commercial success. And the other thing I would say is you have to look also historically at the history of the novel and realize that Jane Austen and Charles Dickens didn't start out to be masters. They were writing serialized books for a popular marketplace. And I think it's the passage of time that elevates popular work to the canon. And in fact, I remember a great class that was offered where Catch-22 was taught, and there's now a 50th edition of Catch-22 where Joseph Heller is being critically revisited, not only in the commercial market but also in the academy. And I think that is a good thing when you get to see the rise and fall of fortunes. And I saw the same thing happen with Fitzgerald and Hemingway, where Tom Wolfe, where writers go in and out of vogue. And I guess one of the questions is, why is that the case? I don't know. I think it's, much of it has to do with various schools of critical thought as to whether they match up with the critique du jour that's being offered. But I find the same thing is true in the motion picture business, where film directors or screenwriters or actors, for that matter, kind of rise and fall in their critical evaluation. And for years, directors like Howard Hawks and John Ford and John Huston were always regarded as kind of mainstream guys who made cowboy movies or detective movies or mysteries. And now there's a whole critical school that has elevated these film noir generalists into very high standing. And 10, 15 years ago, Martin Scorsese was making little gangster movies, and now today he still makes gangster movies, but they're regarded as near classics.
Before we turn to talent agencies and how they work and exactly what you do. As long as you mentioned individual writers, I want to ask you if while you were here at Berkeley or in the master's program, there were writers whom you were particularly interested in and why?
You know, there were, but I would say I was a very eclectic reader and an unusual person who would cross centuries. I had a great English Renaissance Milton class with Paul Oppers. I had a tremendous British literature class with Mark Shore. D.H. Lawrence was always someone I was really drawn to as a novelist, as was the prose of Emerson, Hawthorne. I see myself today more as an Americanist in terms of literary taste and judgment. And there was that great Emerson essay on self-reliance where he really said the Americans had to separate themselves from the continental voice and develop what would be the American idiom. And so over the last 15 years, I've been reading a lot more American writing. But I would also say, let me see, in addition, Fitzgerald, Eliot, Hemingway, 20th century for the most part. E.M. Forster.
Sam talked about making the transition, and we can move back to Berkeley, but I was thinking about the title of your agency, International Creative Management, and Sam warned you that I'm a romanticist. So is it just the romanticist in me that there's some sort of tension between creative and management? What does it mean to manage creativity?
I think both. The name of the company was not an accident. I focus very heavily and have in my career on the international aspect of the business because over the years I've represented a lot of international directors in the UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Australia. And over the years I've worked with directors, some of whom are no longer with us, like Tony Richardson, John Schlesinger, Carol Rice, Lindsay Anderson, as well as French directors like Roman Polanski, Jean-Jacques Gounod, Jean-Jacques Benex, Jean-Pierre Jeunet, Bernardo Bertolucci, terrific director in Italy. We also work with Matteo Garrone, who made a film based on a book by Roberto Saviano called Gomorrah, about the modern Italian mafia. So I've always been interested in working with directors around the world, in addition to mainstream popular writer-directors in the US. But I think part of what we need to do is bridge the gap between pragmatic deal-making, career management, and also be able to communicate those creative ideas with sources of finance and distribution that you need to finally get these movies off the ground. And today it's not so simple because the cost of these films are very expensive. I've got a thought that the business we're in today is really the movie business, 3.0, which is a lot of co-finance, a lot of partnership, a lot of collaboration.
What exactly, a simple question, but what exactly does a talent agency do?
Okay, a talent agency or a talent agent, more specifically, guides and advises an artist in the development of his or her artistic career. They make recommendations, they negotiate contracts on their behalf, they set up financing distribution deals for their movies and their television shows, and they become a kind of partner in their business and creative life.
Has your time at ICM, have your responsibilities shifted? Or maybe a better way of asking that is, what is the relationship between what you do now at ICM and what you've done over the past years?
I began my career as an author's representative in terms of selling novel rights or dramatic rights to motion pictures. Then started representing screenwriters and directors, and a lot of those screenwriters and directors became producers. And I did that in the 70s. In 1980, I became the head of our company and also continued to do that, but also worked on a lot of organizational and administrative issues of the company, which I found less interesting than doing the work itself. but we've got a large agency and a large staff that manages a lot of those details. I'm much more engaged by the creative element of the business and working with artists and finding new opportunities in an expanding market.
Are there certain things you look for when you make a decision?
To work with an artist?
Yeah. Creativity is such a big
Yeah.
category.
I mean, I look, it's unusual because I've been doing this for a while, but generally when I find a new work or a new artist or a new filmmaker, whether it's a screenwriter or a playwright or a director, you almost know in the first 10 pages that something is bouncing off the page and reaching you. And I'm drawn towards that original voice, that character or that quality in writing or in filmmaking that you know is unique and classical in some way, even though it could be experimental.
Well, I was struck, I didn't realize, I think of you as representing authors, but ICN represents theater, live performance, music, recording artists, video games, new media. Has that always been the case, or how has that expanded?
Well, the core quadrants of our company going back 50 years have been the publishing industry, music, film, and television. And of course, theater is certainly a subset of all of that. But over the last decade, with the advent of new media, new digital platforms, we're finding ourselves dealing with the Hulus, the Amazons, the YouTubes, the Googles of the world, the Facebooks, the Twitter, which we believe are all going to become broadcast companies or cable companies in their own way. A way to think about it in terms of relative size is that on any given day, YouTube has about 900 million users around the world. NBC tonight will be thrilled if they get 13 million households plugged in. So when you consider the order of scale that new media offers, it's staggering. And the industry hasn't yet been able to fully monetize that activity. But it's being figured out, and it was figured out in the music industry by Steve Jobs. I mean, no one in the music industry figured out iTunes. It took an outsider and a genius to sort that out. But the other interesting aspect of new media is ask yourself, what's a television? A television for my kids is an iPad. It used to be a box in a living room with some rabbit ears on it. But I think...
Or still is.
Yeah, I think the question of digital media, though, it invites the consumer to ask the question, what are these retrieval systems all about? And the other thing, for years, television was all pushed at you, and now it's pulled towards you. So it's really no longer appointment television. It's an industry that is much more about on-demand. And I think those changes in consumer behavior have created chaos and havoc within the advertising community and within the broadcast network world itself. But it also creates a lot of opportunity.
What about in terms of creativity, the effects of these emerging technologies?
Well, all of the technology in the world is never going to replace a good script, a good cast, good direction. The writing is always going to have to be there. But the means by which these projects are made and produced are all up for grab. I mean, there was at AFI, the American Film Institute last week in Los Angeles, was having AFI week on their short films. And I saw 2 or 3 excellent films that I later learned were made on iPhones. And it just seems to me the barrier of entry is so low and so cheap today that it's not just that every man or woman is an author or a composer, but everyone is a filmmaker. And I also saw something where Lang Lang the other evening at the LA Philharmonic was playing Flight of the Bumblebee on an iPad. And he channeled it through some digital mechanism and it came out symphonically. And
Was it good?
really good. It's the New World Order. Yeah.
Do you see movies as say they were in the 70s or 80s, in movie theaters continuing or not?
I think theaters are going to be around for a long time. But the theater experience is also being augmented by these other channels in which, whether it's home entertainment or whether it's electronic devices, it's something that the industry is taking a long, hard, deep look at, because a few weeks ago, a month or so ago, Universal Pictures was considering releasing a particular movie that was being released actually a few weeks ago called Tower Heist. They were going to release it day and date in cinemas, but also make it available online. And they were going to charge a lot for the online. The theater owners, said you can't do that, and if you do that, certain theater chains are not going to play the movie, and the studio blinked, and they pulled back from the plan. But what's going to happen on a movie that they actually will be able to get away with it? Because what if they tried it on Batman, where the studios know the theater owners are not going to refuse that movie? So I think there's a dialectical change going on in the market. One, about how we think about movies, the same way I said, what's TV, what's a movie? I mean, a movie is a film, and does that mean it's a film just seen in a theater? Or does that mean it's a film seen on a variety of devices whenever you want? So one of the things that we have to come to grips with is the language itself that envelops an industry that is going through fundamental change.
Is there something you point to as a particular achievement that you have been especially satisfied with at ICM, either an achievement of in the business sense in terms of a merger, or an achievement in the creative sense?
Well, representing a number of clients, it's always a huge mistake to identify one thing at the expense of the other. But what I am proud of is that over many decades we've built, I think, a world-class company with very talented people who both are represented by the agency and also who work as agents in the firm. And I think in the last 25 years or so, we've done about 20 acquisitions of other companies into our organization, and those companies are in the publishing world and film and music and theater. So we're pretty eclectic in terms of how we think about the entertainment business and also how we think about the media business. And it's a constantly evolving one, and we need to just be in front of it.
What piece of advice would you give to someone in the audience about to graduate from Cal who has a very strong talent, whether it's in writing or singing or something else? Is there a piece of advice?
Well, first of all, if you are an artist and you know if you are or not, then it's an unavoidable road you're going to go down. And it doesn't mean it's going to be a simple one, and it doesn't mean it's just going to fall in your lap. And there are a lot of 20-year overnight sensations we deal with all of the time. But I think it's an exciting life, it's an exciting career. It's filled with unpredictability and risk, but if you've got the goods, it also has great rewards, personally and financially.
I think the pressure a lot of English majors feel these days is to have in mind what they will do, the path they will follow exactly. The joke about the English major is always, what are you going to do with that? Since the path seems less clear.
See, and I think it's not. I think the path is so clear because what other major provides you with the critical skills of writing, of reasoning, of oral expression, of a point of view about a genre of literature. I think you do whatever you want with an English major, because if you've got those abilities, you can take it clearly into any profession. By the way, my roommate at Berkeley, we were both in the English department. He's now a triage surgeon in Southern California. And he went back to Berkeley after he graduated to do all of this pre-med. I mean, he had never taken a science class in his life, and he scrapes bodies off the freeway and has saved 10,000 lives in his career. So that's one example, and it seems for a lot of my fellow students at the time, it seemed a lot of them went into the law business but left the practice of law somewhere between year 10 and 20. A lot went into teaching. Several, like myself, went into business, and a lot became writers. And I also was influenced by being in a family of writers. My father was a writer for television in the 50s and 60s when television was live. I have a brother who's a biographer, Pulitzer Prize winner. And we were at school more or less at the same time. He was at Princeton, I was at Berkeley. So I think when you live in a household where writing and the discussion of writing was not only encouraged but required, it gave me a clearer path. But again, totally accidental that I wound up, still doing this 42 years later.
So part of what you're saying is you don't have to jump from commencement into your career of your life.
I think it's a huge mistake because I think I'd be the exception to the rule. I think younger students today are going to have 5 or 6 different careers and maybe twice that many jobs in 3 or 4 different countries around the world. And I think you need to think much differently about not only how you conduct your academic life, but how you're going to manage your professional life. And part of what we do as agents is we help our clients manage their lives. That would indicate that maybe agents are good about managing their own lives. Some are, some aren't. But it's certainly challenging.
Use some help, I have to say. I read somewhere that you are quoted as saying that agents have to develop a kind of resistance to rejection. This is something I could stand to learn. How did you develop a resistance to rejection?
One, by believing I was right, they were wrong. Secondly, by not personalizing it, realizing the person on the other end of the table, if you really do have a good relationship with that person, you're going to be working with them for many, many years. You're going to be in and out of business on successes, on failures, on in-betweeners, and to understand that person has his own set of objectives about what they want to put on the air or what movies they're looking to make or what actors or filmmakers they want to be with. And my view always was that if people were going to bet against me, I was just going to prove them wrong. And Montaigne has some line in one of his essays is, don't make your enemy's blood gush, just make them blush. Just embarrass them in success.
I wanted to ask a question, another question about working with artists. But before I do, I want to encourage you all to finish writing down any questions you have and pass the cards to either side of the aisle, and they'll be collected, and in 5 minutes we'll move to questions. You mentioned when we were talking in the office before that one of the pleasures of being in the position you're in, one of the pleasures of being in the position you're in now is the ability to work directly with artists. And I'm wondering, when you do that, what kinds of exchanges or input you have, what kinds of things what kind of difference you're interested in making?
Well, first of all, it's a very personal relationship. It's not just an economic relationship. It's professional, but it's personal. It's psychological. It's economic. But at the heart of it, we have to somehow represent those creative instincts and go into the market and help make that commercially viable and hopefully critically successful. And those two elements together promote longevity. So a quick, good deal is not going to get you to the finish line. The work has to be there. It has to achieve correct results. And as Hyman Roth said in The Godfather, you got to make money for your partners. So you've got to do both at the same time.
I like the idea that you've quoted both Montaigne and Hyman Roth. Is it important to develop those relationships over a significant amount of time with artists?
Many of the people with whom I've been working, I've had 20, 30, 35-year relationships. So yeah, these are long, deep associations, and I'm equally excited about, newer people I've been working with over the last 4 or 5 years. And so it's kind of that the chain of being. It's a renewing process. Which also means you've got to be open to new ideas and new trends and find ways to take things and introduce them to a market economy, whether it's in fiction or film or television, and have it successful. And a big part of that is working with younger colleagues who are obviously, generationally attuned to what the market basically is in the movie business, which is the audience between 18 and 30.
You spoke earlier about raising the bar, or hoping that you could raise the bar. You want successful films, but you also want films that you feel have a kind of quality, however you judge that. Is there a project you recently worked on that people might know where you felt that you had to do some lifting, when you felt that you could raise the bar and you're proud of that?
Well, there are a couple of things. On the motion picture side, I've always been drawn towards working with writer-directors. There's a movie coming out in a couple of weeks that I'm proud of because the story behind it has had a lot of public controversy associated with it. And that's Roman Polanski's new movie, God of Carnage. And I've worked with Polanski for 30 years, and this is a film that had a lot of trouble because he was under arrest. His prior film was edited in prison. But it also says that as agents, many times you're put in very unusual situations, and you never quite know how to respond to them until you're there. But I would say over the years there have been 50 different movies that I've been fortunate to be involved with, from Terms of Endearment to Star Wars to Peter Benchley's Shark books, which were successful. And it's just a constant process of finding new filmmakers and new projects that you're going to be excited about.
This doubles back to the beginning of our conversation, but I had been wanting to ask you, you mentioned your brother. I know that he went to private school on the East Coast. What made you choose a public school as opposed to a private school? You could have done either.
I really wanted to come to Berkeley. I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in Connecticut, moved to Los Angeles. I went to a public high school in Los Angeles, University High School, that sent a lot of students to Berkeley. And I was influenced particularly by 2 or 3 students a year or so ahead of me, who one weekend said, "Come on up here and see it." And I did, and that was in 1965, when the place was just like crazy. And well, it was under a lot of unusual influences, and I thought this would be the place for me. And I also knew that I wanted to be an English major. That was one of the reasons why I came here. I mean, you don't declare your first year, but I knew where I was going to wind up. And I wanted to go to a public university. I thought that was really something important.
Because?
I thought the richness of the campus, the diversity of the student body, the nature of the community. Berkeley had a tremendous social history, even before the 60s. And I thought this would make great sense to me. A lot of my other friends went to the Southern campus and had equally good experiences, but they had a very different life. I mean, it was more of a commuter life. And when I was up here, I really stayed here. You don't like go home if you're having a bad hour. And it taught me a lot about independence and self-reliance and how to navigate the complexity of UC. Not so simple. But, and the English department was at the time and still is a very large group, and your success in that group, I always thought was going to be a function of the relationships and associations you had, not only with the faculty, but more so with the students. And we had a very strong group of kids who were able to work and study together.
Have you kept in touch with your cohort over the years?
Some of the faculty, yes, and some of my fellow students, yes. I mean, they're living all over the world, but I would say a dozen of us still stay in touch.
And there's a strong Berkeley contingent in the industry, I believe.
There is. I think, directly or indirectly, there are a couple of hundred of us who are active in the motion picture and television industries. And a couple of years ago, we hosted an event at Fox Studios. It was called Modestly the Brilliance of Berkeley. And I think 350 people showed up, which was great.
We began talking before a bit about Berkeley and public higher education. And before we move to the question and answer period, I'd like to ask you as a Cal alum to speak a bit about your sense of the value of public higher education. When you began to talk, you mentioned some parallels between Berkeley in the 60s and now, and
Yeah.
we've just been through and are continuing to live through over the past 2 years, and last week and this week in particular, a time of upheaval and reflection about the value of the university in a time of significant loss of state support. So it's a question about, as an alum, the value of public higher education.
Well, you know, that opens a broader subject about what the master plan was under Clark Kerr at the time. And it was a brilliant plan that the legislature, the governor, Pat Brown, enacted, where at the community college level, the state college level, and the state university, that everyone in California would have a shot based on their academic merit at a quality education and could move up or through the system however they wanted. And by affordable, I mean, I looked at I saved my reg card and I came across it recently. I think my first semester here, my total fees were $103. I mean, it was virtually a free ticket. I mean, I think the year maybe cost a couple of $100, you know, plus I was living on campus. But it was free. And it was at a time when certainly UC was valued as a critical asset to the California economy, because the idea was you produce elite students out of an elite research university, and it was going to be free. And that seemed to be a powerful idea to me. And 17 or 18 years later, I got very involved with the campus at the level of a committee we created at LNS. Don McQuaid, hi Don, was certainly a part of that group. And it set out to do some really good things in terms of affecting not just the quality of undergraduate life at Berkeley, but you know what the tensions were on the school and the rest of the UCs financially, as public support started eroding away from the base. And I always saw that as one of the great tragedies, but just a way to further think about a comparison. I think when I left school in 1969, there were 7 UC campuses, and there were 11 state prisons. Today, there is one new UC beyond Irvine and San Diego that were up and running, and that's Merced. And there are 16 new prisons.
How many more?
And that's, to me, misallocation of resources. and opportunity. So whenever and criminal justice is probably the fastest growing industry we have in California. That to me is something you gotta just think about. I'm sorry? Oh, guys have fun. Good.
Media.
Yeah, new meeting.
Media.
Anyway, that's my talk on it.
I'd like to say, you to say a little more about that, and then we'll turn to questions and answers, and that is, what, if anything, do you think should be done about what you're calling a misallocation of resources? Or to ask the question a different way, you eloquently outlined the vision of a master plan. Does that seem to you sustainable? It should be advisable?
It seems to me today, looking at the state practically from an economic perspective, that that moment may not be recaptured. When when Gray Davis was voted out of office on the recall, and Arnold came in, the deficit in California, I think, was $12 billion. And that was an outrage. And when he left, it was $27 billion. So, it's just a question of ways and means. Where are the priorities going to be? And will this state ever come close to funding UC the way it did in the 60s? I don't think so. But there may have to be new kinds of public-private partnerships that are created that give the university the funding it needs to be competitive. And you know that. You feel it, when you're trying to attract new faculty or retain existing faculty. I mean, it's the big tension that the publics have against the privates, both on recruitment and retention. And it's the same thing we go in our business every day. But I think it needs to occupy a higher level of priority on the legislative agenda.
I think everyone in the room would agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, it kills me when I look at the fees increasing and ask myself, what's it like to be graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt when I know that again, $100 a semester to begin. It went up to $400 at the end.
I think we'll turn to a few questions now, and then socialize and consume and imbibe down the hall. And the first question I have here, and actually several people asked this question that I alluded to in my opening remarks, and that is, how did you get that first summer job reading scripts?
I just applied for a job. I had known someone who ran the agency, and it was basically like intern pay. It was like $50 a week, but it got my foot in the door, and I did a good job. And as a result, I was asked back the next year, and the next year, and the next year. And then when I finished school, I had an offer to go to work as a junior agent. So sometimes the best thing to do is just get in the door.
And this is a related question of what is the likelihood of getting a position in the film world/industry right after Berkeley in this day and age? What would you have to do?
Well, first of all, we hire every year about 17 or 18 new trainees, interns. We have a process, and all the agencies do, and all the studios do, and all the networks do. But I would also say, so does every other student around the country. But there are real jobs. There are real entry-level jobs that are available to people who are passionate about the industry, who want to get a foothold in the business. And if you make yourself indispensable and unavoidable, you will get a gig. It will happen.
In your view, what is talent? What conditions do you believe best nurture creativity?
Talent needs to be free, but it also needs to be circumscribed. It needs limits, but it needs license. So we're somehow in that nexus. of recommending, suggesting ways in which you can make opportunities happen without putting a lid on the box. That's the best way I can describe it.
And at ICM, are you involved in both the limits and the license?
I think I have to be, because at some point the limits will have to do with what is the cost of a project. And the license has to be encouraging and making available the opportunity for an artist really to fulfill his vision.
Another question is, after so many years in the talent industry, has your idea of creativity changed at all?
I don't think so. I think it's still driven by the primary motives that I outlined earlier. It's the uniqueness of character. It's the expression of voice. It's the turn of a phrase. It's someone's critical eye. It's a performance that you never forget. And I've had, a dozen moments like that in my life. I mean, I remember when I saw Laurence Olivier, do Long Day's Journey at the National Theatre in London 30 years ago. There are haunting moments that stay with you forever, the same way when you look at an Orson Welles movie or a Truffaut film or a movie by Pabst or a movie by Howard Hawks, who was really a much better director than the critics of the time made.
Another way of asking the question might be to ask, to what extent do you see talent working within already established conventions? And to what extent do you identify talent with something you haven't seen before?
Well, the movie industry and the television industry are conventional idioms, but what you can do in cable television today, again, talking about license and limits, is much freer in terms of expression, censorship, language, subject matter than broadcast network. And in the movie industry, the major studios are all in search of a certain kind of movie, but there are smaller independent distributors that will allow movies like The Crying Game to get distributed, or movies that might not fit the conventional bill of a studio looking to release a movie in 3,000 screens on an opening weekend. But I think the fun is to work in both of those arenas, which we do.
Question is, how have your ideals or principles changed since you left Berkeley in 1969?
I hope not as much as, let me say this, more than you would imagine, less than you may think. But your ideals are really part of your value structures. And you can have a critical value structure that should not be that different than your personal value structure, and how you conduct yourself and what your own ethical makeup is and what your own integrity is. I mean, that stays with you forever. So I think it's a good idea not to change midstream on that one.
The same questioner asks, when you offer career advice to your clients, how much is driven by the desire for quality of work and how much is driven by profit potential?
Well, I think we want to do both, because we don't want to encourage people to partake in unsuccessful ventures. That becomes a setback. At the same time, it just can't be driven time and again by derivative work or sequels or remakes or doing something that maybe you've done a dozen times. I know that's the easier path, but that doesn't necessarily make for a more fulfilling creative life.
And thank you. And as a last question, many talk about the importance of mentors in their careers and their lives. Did you have professional mentors?
Yeah, I did. I got lucky twice. When I was 23, 24, I got the chance to work for a gentleman who was running our agency called CMA, named Freddie Fields, who's a tremendous agent. And I really worked in his office for 4 or 5 years, learning everything, reading his mail, reading his scripts, handling certain client projects for them. And I think in a way that helped accelerate my own career because I got a front and center view, not only of how a terrific agent operated, but also how a business operated. And that was a lucky combination.
And the second time?
The second time was in 1980. I was around 33, and I was thinking of doing something else outside of the agency business. I was thinking about doing something in the investment banking world around media and entertainment. And the fellow who owned the company, a man named Marvin Josephson, said, you know, don't do that. Why don't you become president of ICM?
It's a good mentor.
It is. And again, it was the opportunity of my life. And I said yes, not having a clue as to what I was saying yes to. A month afterwards, I came up to Berkeley and did an accelerated accounting finance program because I didn't really even understand the grammar of the balance sheet. But that proved to be very useful in terms of strategy and financial understanding. And you build upon that foundation and learn more and expand your own horizons. So I think mentors are critical in any business, in any academic environment, and whatever you're going to do. If you're here and are not taking advantage of the collective wisdom, that's probably a missed opportunity.
I'm sure Jeff will be happy to talk further with you at the reception, which again is down the hall in room 330. For now, I would very much like to thank Jeffrey Berg for coming up